Okay. Um, I I think it's about to go into full screen mode, and so you'll be seeing the slides properly. Give it just a second. There we go. All right. So let me go ahead and get us started. I'm gonna do a couple different things today. I'm gonna try to further motivate this topic, but then really dig down on it. In addition to reviewing a little bit what we talked about together last week. I've got a series of images here. This is the second uh, lecture in this series. And I'm going to focus today a little bit on repairing our Constitution. And saying a little bit, obviously, that's a big topic. And part of what I am doing to refresh your memory is thinking about this image, right, which is the primary image of political empowerment in the 21st century, given the way that our democratic aspirations have been shaped by our 18th century Constitution. I think this is democracy working well according to the confines of that Constitution, in the sense that you have an orderly, respectful, diverse group of voters, decked out, a lot of them in red, white, and blue, seemingly patriotic, waiting in line. You even have, I don't know if you can see, but the sign translated into multiple languages. And so some sense that the 18th century Constitution is succeeding in housing 21st century democracy. Well, yes and no, but maybe an old house needs some repairs, but the 18th century bones are still good bones. We'll just repair the underlying structure, update it a little bit, and it'll work perfectly well. Here's another way in which democracy is expressed in the United States today, a fair bit, through protest politics. And one of the things that protest politics seems to express is that simply voting is not enough, and that there are things that we are upset enough about, that we care enough about, that we demand change for or on, and that electoral politics is not sufficiently responsive to. We need a change, right? And so is the question here the change being called for, a change in which the parties and the candidates respond to our ideas, concerns, needs, interests, or is it a deeper sense of change? We need a form of politics that doesn't just channel all of our democratic aspirations into occasional elections. That doesn't sufficiently empower us. That's too attenuated a form of political participation. We need to do something like this, actually attend a meeting where we get to speak our piece with fellow citizens, and at the end of the meeting, vote in a way that actually determines meaningful policy issues. And this is, as I've mentioned, a participatory budget meeting in New York City. This is a meeting where the citizens of this small neighborhood are turning out to say whether it's schooling or policing or curbside composting or some other thing that is a priority for them in terms of the municipal budget, right? So that's the question, the underlying question. To review briefly, my suggestion last week is that we have two fundamentally distinct ways of thinking about making democracy work better in the 2020s and for the middle of the 21st century. And that is, on the one hand, attempting to repair the institutions we already have, which have grown old and creaky, but can be updated in ways that will make them functional for this century, or should instead we engage in experimentation with new institutions, new practices. Perhaps we've learned enough in the intervening years that rather than trying to rescue the old structure, we should either tear it down and build something in its place, or maybe try to add another few rooms to the structure, another way of housing democratic politics that maybe functions better. And the second way of putting it, we don't have to tear the current constitution down, suggests that these two are not actually mutually exclusive, but in a world of limited time, energy, effort, at the where the kind of hope and energy that sustain reform are limited resources, we maybe need to get clear which of these is the more important priority for us. I also last week spoke with you about some diagnoses, and those diagnoses. I shouldn't say last week. Last time we spoke about this, it's been a couple weeks. Those diagnoses um, have, I think, important implications for how we approach this task and how we understand the dysfunction of contemporary democracy. And my underlying image here is that the values, the hopes, the promise of democracy that is embedded in our Constitution emerges from revolutionary moments. And in our case, especially, of course, 1776 to 1789, the period in which we established our independence and then eventually adopted a new constitution, and that the constitution embodies the hopes of democracy and attempts to institutionalize them, the hopes that were used as rallying cries in those revolutions. But please note that it's one thing to have a slogan in a pamphlet that says that we the people, right, are all created equal and endowed by our creator with certain unalienable rights, and that gives us the power to both demand a responsive government that protects our rights, or to tear down and build up a new government if the government we have fails to do that. It's another thing to figure out how to realize that in practice. And I think in obvious ways, the Constitution of 1789 falls short. It, of course, incorporates slavery. It does not include a right to vote. It certainly does not extend the right to vote to the vast majority of the inhabitants of the newly formed country, including women, including those who don't own a substantial portion of property, including obviously the enslaved or the indigenous. And so we didn't just get there all at once, but nevertheless, our Constitution does contain a right to free speech, a right to assemble, a right to petition, a description of a government that attempts to accommodate popular accountability among officials who exercise significant power over us. There's an ambivalence and an ambiguity to that constitutional inheritance in which the democratic aspirations are preserved, but not in fact fully realized. And I would point out, once we move beyond the confines of the Constitution, those aspirations are also counterfactual in a second sense, not only not fully institutionalized in the Constitution, but also the Constitution does not actually describe the totality of our political or social world. In fact, it's words on parchment stored in the Smithsonian. Where is the action, right? And a lot of the action is in the economy, which is a market capitalist economy generating a lot of inequality, Jefferson's declaration of our equality notwithstanding, right? And so once we add, right, that we're a society with an economy, with a racial order, with technology, gender relations, certain ways of structuring the family, we recognize, right, that the promise of the Constitution is not only not fully realized in the institutions the Constitution creates, it's in tension with a whole bunch of other aspects of our society. And so the result is this tension, right? This constitutive tension. And part of what I want to suggest, two things that follow from this framework of thinking. First, that tension can be felt to be more or less dramatic, right? And so how far are we off? And by the way, if you're an African American slave, if you're a woman denied the right to vote, if you're a Native American whose land is being expropriated, the tension, it may be so great to make it feel like the Constitution is nothing but ideology, nothing but a story that the majority tells itself so it feels better about dominating the rest of us. Having said that, I will also note that for many of those groups, actually, they didn't give up on the constitutional promise, despite the fact that it was so obviously and blatantly betrayed to them. They, in fact, continued to fight for its realization. But even if you're not in groups that are not even formally included in the constitutional promise, if you're a member of the lucky groups that actually are formally afforded rights, you may still feel like this is not really the way our society works. And these rights don't do much for me. And that, again, can lead you to one of two conclusions, one of which is this doesn't work, I'm giving up. The other is this was promised me and I demand it, right? And so either defeatism, fatalism, cynicism, maybe authoritarianism or populism, or demands for reform. And I'll say a little bit more about that, but I think that it's important to acknowledge that both of those are, if you will, fairly typical reactions to the discord, the dissonance between what the Constitution promises and what our reality actually demonstrates is the case. So the other big conclusion is that democracy is not realized through a revolution or through a constitution that is drafted and ratified at a particular moment. It is realized through protracted struggle to better realize the promise contained in the revolution and the Constitution. This is a centuries long process, and it is a process that, if we're going to salvage democracy in the United States in the 21st century, we desperately need to resume. And I will point out, as we look now at the history of the United States, as not a initial establishment of democracy followed by then a long history of stable democracy, but instead as an initial promise that was not in fact capable of being realized at the moment it was enunciated, and then a protracted struggle to better realize that promise, to make a more perfect union, not all at once, but over centuries of struggle. We also need to recognize who joins and who resists that struggle, and to note that there are those who benefit from the limited, imperfect, and anti-democratic aspects of our Constitution, those who are typically privileged, who are at the top of hierarchies of status, power, and wealth that are incompatible with democracy. Of course, they are often, therefore, interested in resisting fuller democratization and democratic justice. Those excluded are, if they take the promise seriously, most interested in reform. Those in the middle, I'm going to refer to them as the middle strata, the middle classes. They are often formally included, but not benefited to the same degree as those who are privileged. They're typically a swing, right? Do they side with the elites? In which case, probably the battle for reform is going to be very long and very difficult. Or do the excluded, the marginal, find ways of suggesting to the middle strata, you're more like us than them, or you should recognize in your situation aspects of our situation that lead you to have sympathy with us, and please then join our struggle, and it will be better for all of us if we succeed, right? And so the success of the struggle to further democratize, to further realize the promise of democratic justice depends on those who are excluded carrying that struggle into the streets, into protest politics, building social movements, but it also depends crucially on the middle strata joining them or not. So why do we need this battle, this struggle in the middle of the 21st century? And I'm just going to, and I promise I will do this quickly, go through with you synthesis that I've constructed by reading a whole bunch of books and articles and trying to just accumulate a list. What's wrong with our democracy in the 21st century? And the list, it's almost laughable, right? 19 different uh, failings of democracy, which I've grouped under 8 headings. Let's go through them very quickly just to get a sense. We have rapid and disruptive technological change, right? And we see this all the time. It's boiling over with the scandals about anti-Semitism and Elon Musk and what's going on in Twitter or X, what's going on in TikTok, the way in which the coverage of the Gaza war, the percentage of people who believe the election was stolen, we can keep going. The number of different ways you can find that Donald Trump is not in fact being legally treated but persecuted, etc. So disruptive technological change, rapid and disintegrative cultural change. I'll go into this in greater detail in a few minutes. Rapid and dislocating economic change. Again, I'll provide more information on that. And rapid demographic change. We are on our way to becoming a multiracial democracy. All of this together creates high levels of normative threat for many members of democratic publics, and it brings out conservative or authoritarian tendencies in large segments of the people. And that creates a tempting opportunity for political entrepreneurs who want to play that card. And so this is not just America, this is throughout the world. This is the first category, and please note it includes 4 separate developments. Second category, the reemergence of anti-immigration, nativist, authoritarian populism, as well as the resurfacing of deep currents of a racial history in this country in particular, in which citizenship and other rights are identified as markers of white racial status or privilege. And then major political parties turning against established democratic and liberal norms that protect minorities, that promote equality, that promote in particular equality of opportunity, and that might suggest reparations for past racial injustice. As opposed to going in that direction, we have racial reactionary nativism swelling in our politics. Third heading, growing political polarization. And this is fed by this. And I want to be as clear as possible. I should have underlined this before. I think both the conservative and authoritarian populism and the anti-immigrant and racial populism are mainly minority phenomena, right? It's not the case that the majority of the members of the United States or the demos of other democracies are moving in this direction, but it's a substantial minority, and it's enough to potentially threaten the health of democratic societies. Um, and so if you have a majority that is perhaps welcoming immigration, trying to maintain fidelity to liberal democratic norms, not swayed by authoritarian populism, and a minority perhaps electorally viable. Many European societies have parliamentary systems in which coalitions can be formed, in which a minority party can get majority power. Our constitution amplifies minority power. And so in those circumstances, you have two sides that don't view each other as having reasonable conceptions of justice and democracy that are rivals, and between which we need to have a conversation to figure out which is the better of the two. Instead, you have a kind of existential politics. They are a threat to democracy. And I will point out to you, I actually believe many of the authoritarian populist parties are a threat to democracy. But saying that and then having that become part of our politics, and recognizing, of course, that those who I regard as a threat also regard me as a threat to their privilege, to their status, to their standing, to their respect and dignity within this society. So our politics has become increasingly an existential struggle, right? And that does not make for a healthy, well-functioning democracy. You add to that, we have, now moving to the fourth category, a decline in bottom-up civil society-based organizations, whether it's political parties that really are organized from the bottom up, or unions, or social movements. And political participation and engagement with our politics is declining as well. And then finally, in this category, elite capture and unresponsiveness in democratic institutions. And so the idea that not only are there deep reasons to be dissatisfied with our contemporary society, its politics, its major trends, what it means for our well-being, but our political institutions and practices don't give us outlets to believe that we can channel our discontent constructively into reform. Now, fifth category, right? A restructuring of the public sphere and knowledge systems, right? And to be as clear as possible, public opinion is formed in the media system. People come to have the beliefs about politics they have as a result of a knowledge system, and digital technology first, and now social media, many to many media, have made it very easy for disinformation and for incendiary suggestions to circulate widely. And you add to that that this is met halfway by the credulity, the willingness to believe, the hunger perhaps to believe things that aren't true, but that articulate widespread shared senses of something being amiss, discontent, anxiety, right? So how can people believe the idea that Hillary Clinton is engaged in child trafficking? Because they think there's something deeply corrupt and amiss in our politics. And here's a glaring example of it being widely circulated throughout the media system. Please note that this media system also is engineered. It is dependent upon algorithms that are built in order to produce strong emotions, fear, anger, anxiety, because those emotions hold us on the screens. And that's how the manufacturers of this technology, the owners of the social media infrastructure, make their money. And again, right, 41 states, I think it is now, suing Meta because their internal research showed that this is exactly how this works, and that it was unhealthy for children, for adolescents. And yet they went ahead and peddled this technology to them because it's how they make profits. This is, I think, part of the problem with democracy. Democracy works best when we are willing to deliberate. That is, to make arguments about why the position I favor is the better position, to listen to the other side, to respond deliberatively, and I'm going to say somewhat dispassionately, to their arguments, to not just immediately view them as so threatening, so wrong-headed, so evil or corrupt that I can dismiss without having to listen to what they say. In an atmosphere of deliberately amplified raw emotions, it becomes much more difficult for democracy to rely on a deliberative background culture. Seventh big category, and now really getting into the stuff I want to be speaking in detail with you about: outdated democratic institutions, right? Reflecting 18th century ideas and maybe updated in the middle of the 20th century, that really are perhaps no longer expressive of who we are, what we think, what we know about human political behavior. And then add to this the growth of the administrative state, the transferring of political decision making to bureaucratic agencies with very little accountability, so that they're neither particularly effective nor particularly democratic. And we have a constitution or an underlying structure to our politics that has failed to keep up with the way the state actually works, where power is actually exercised in the 21st century. Finally, we have efforts at institutionalizing democracy that primarily are located, organized at the level of the nation state, while many of the most important forces that affect us in the 21st century are global forces. We can speak here of ecological, technological, and economic forces that present potential crises that can only be addressed internationally, globally, and yet our democracy is organized at the national scale at a level where we can't actually rise to meet the problems that may be the most important problems in the middle of the 21st century. All right, so I'm going to do a radical pivot right now, and move out of the history, out of the diagnosis, and into some of the symptoms. And here I'm just going to spend a few minutes talking about the fact that we are now less than a year away from a major presidential election in the United States. And I believe what the polls show today show deep rot in our democracy. So first of all, please note, right, that it's early and it's hard to rely on these polls. This is a snapshot of where we are in November of 2023, not an indication of where we'll be in November of 2024. I want to say that with great clarity. Nevertheless, I think that we should be disturbed about where we are in November of 2023, even if we don't necessarily think it predicts where we will be a year from now. And that is to say that in the United States, the politician who represents the populist, authoritarian, racist resurgency the anti uh, let me put it this way: the traditionalism who relies on disinformation, he is currently polling ahead in 5 out of the 6 swing states. He needs to win the election, right? If the election were held today, and if these polls are accurate, Donald Trump would be the next president of the United States. And by the way, don't confuse this for enthusiasm for Donald Trump, right? Donald Trump is deeply unpopular with the majority of Americans. He's just not quite as unpopular as Joe Biden is, right? And so 20% of the people in these polls say they don't want to vote for either of these men. And please note that a lot of the people who support Trump support him because they dislike Biden. And the majority of people who support him because they dislike Trump, right? And so this is driving people to consider third-party candidates. We've got a Kennedy on the ballot. We've got Cornel West on the ballot. We may have a Joe Manchin on the ballot. And so please note, right, that at least Kennedy seems to be taking a little bit more from Biden than from Trump. It's quite close, but this may increase the likelihood of a populist authoritarian being president for the second time, and that would mean for 8 out of the last 12 years. That's a deep threat to American democracy. What's happening in the electorate that helps to explain this? I think Biden is losing support where he needs it. He's losing support among non-white voters. He's losing some support among women. He's particularly losing support among 18 to 44 years olds. And I'm going to say a little bit more about these trends, but I want to really focus on the age issue here, where the US support for Israel, Biden's frankly quite unwavering support for a government that is, in the eyes of many younger people, engaged in a clearly unjust war, where American munitions and American dollars are being used to kill innocent Palestinian civilians. That Biden is doing this is eroding enthusiasm for him among younger voters, right? And please note, right, the people without a college degree, people with lower income, again, substantial erosion of support vis-a-vis where he was when he won the last election across all of these groups. And so I've suggested one explanation for the erosion of support from younger voters. I want to suggest a second explanation for the erosion of support from less well-educated, less wealthy, and racial minority voters. And that is the widespread perception that Biden is not doing a good job handling the economy, that Donald Trump did a better job, right? And so please note, again, striking that Trump is outpolling Biden almost 2-to-1 on the economy for younger voters. Similar ratio for voters a little bit older. As you get further into the age scale, a little bit more evenness, but there's not a single group in this polling data who says that Joe Biden does a better job than Donald Trump with regards to the economy. Most voters vote either on these so-called bread and butter issues, right? How am I doing? Or else often on pure sentiment or identification. I'll get into that in just a moment. But please note that this data does seem to track a genuine reality, right? For the 4 years that Donald Trump was president, wage growth exceeded inflation with the exception of maybe a few weeks, right? For the period that Joe Biden has been president, inflation has exceeded wage growth for all but a few months. And what that means, right, is that people's purchasing power, people's financial security have been undermined in the 3 years that Joe Biden has been president. And so this data reflects not just a sentiment, but a reality. And I want to drill down on this just a little bit better, because I think there's this effort to take credit for Bidenomics, right, on the part of Joe Biden, for the idea that his economic programs have produced the greatest job growth we've seen in the last 50 years, that unemployment is way down, that wages are up, and that maybe we're having a soft landing after a long period of inflation, not tipping into a recession. And I think, in a sense, he's right about all of that. But then let us remember that those are all, quote, macro indicators of financial health. They don't speak to how more job creation translates to the actual lived experience of somebody trying to get by on what they're making in America in 2023. And to be as clear as possible, right? Again, under Trump, the majority, I shouldn't say the majority, the plurality of people responding to these polls said that they were better off this year than they were last year. That was true across the entire Trump presidency, although with the outbreak of COVID, the 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 gap narrowed. It got almost to the point where there were the same number of people saying they were worse off as saying they were better off. Now, right, 3 years into Biden's presidency, please note the number of people who say they're worse off is almost twice the number of people who say they're better off. So people really don't feel that Bidenomics is working for them. And I think the clear way to see why it's not working has to do with the distribution of the benefits of wealth creation in our economy. This diagram, right, from a recent op-ed in the New York Times, which I find very helpful in thinking this through, the top 1% has 31% of the wealth in our society. You add to that the next 9%. So now we've got the top 10% with 2/3 of the wealth in our society. The bottom 50% has less than 3% of the wealth in our society. And so an economy that is working well and Joe Biden is trying to take credit for is so skewed that many people just are not feeling the benefits of it. And the result is that they are turning against Biden, and that there's a real chance that we will have a second term of Donald Trump coming into 2025 out of the next election. That seems to me a very good sign that democracy is not working in the United States very well. And it's not just that Joe Biden is having a hard time creating a more equal economy. Clearly, that is the case. It is further compounded by the fact that the US government, our political system, has had a very hard time navigating the transition to a global economy without simply allowing greater and greater inequality, greater and greater precariousness among the bottom 50% to take hold, we have a dyspeptic mood in our politics, anger, grievance, anxiety, and the candidate who better channels that. Not, never mind the policy positions. What did Donald Trump actually accomplish in his 4 years in office? Was it actually good for you? Is Joe Biden actually responsible for inflation? Are Biden's policies more likely to help you than Trump's? That is, in a sense, not the conversation that seems to be determining the way in which most voters are lining up to vote in 2024. Donald Trump channels the anger, the anxiety, the grievance, the alchemy of populism is in part to take anxiety, which is a difficult emotion, and to re to sublimate it maybe into anger, easier emotion, right? And Donald Trump embodies that, and Joe Biden doesn't. And the result is that Donald Trump is a viable presidential candidate in 2024, notwithstanding the fact that he has 91 felony indictments. There's a whole bunch of stuff I'm not talking about right now. I'm not talking about abortion and abortion politics. I'm not talking about what happens if Donald Trump is actually convicted. I'm not talking about the fact that we have, of course, a long primary season before we even know who the candidates are. I'm asking you to look at the polls from November of 2023 and use them not to predict what's going to happen in 2024, but diagnostically about the health of American democracy. And I think that they give us serious pause for concern. So now let me assume that I've convinced you both through the long-term analysis and through the immediate analysis of what's happening in the United States that our democracy is ailing and that we need to be thinking about how to repair it. I will point out we could go to, and I've got 7 different doctors on the board, 7 different doctors, and get 7 different diagnoses. I'm going to go through this very quickly just to give you a sense of how difficult it is to reach a consensus about exactly what's wrong with American democracy. I'm going to go into to one account in much greater detail. Is it the lack of a shared reality? And this is traced back to media content that's no longer produced in accord with reality testing dynamics. So we're just garbage in, garbage out of public sphere in which there's so much disinformation and lies that it's impossible to form rational public opinion, and therefore our elections are exercises in expressing emotions much more than deciding issues? Or is it second of all? And right, so here that's Lawrence Lessig of Harvard University. Adam Prozorski of NYU has a very different diagnosis in his book on the crises of democracy. Is that our social cleavages, our conflicts of interest have grown so extreme that it's very hard to manage them via elections. I believe I've spoken with you about Prozorski before. He describes elections as throwing paper stones rather than really throwing rocks at each other. We express our animosity via going to the polling station, filling in some bubbles, and then we are satisfied with the outcome, or at least no longer animated by animosity towards each other. And he suggests that requires that the differences be of a kind where you can say, well, the other side won, that's not such a big deal, as opposed to differences where you say, if the other side wins, it's a catastrophe for me, it's a catastrophe for people like me, and therefore I don't think I'm going to accept the outcome of an election if it doesn't go my way. Yasha Munk, in his influential book, The People versus Democracy, suggests that we have had essentially an instrumental commitment to democracy in the 20th century. As democracy, modern democracy, really took hold, it coincided with an economy that delivered the goods for most people. Well, in the 21st century, our economy is not delivering the goods. That's the economic data I just shared with you. And therefore, people are withdrawing support for democracy because they don't think it works. They I'm reading a book about liberal capitalism and political capitalism, where political capitalism is the Chinese or Russian model capitalism managed by an illiberal state. They're maybe looking at that and thinking maybe that would be better. Maybe populist authoritarianism would do better at delivering the goods. Ryan Enos, and not really a book about how democracy works or doesn't work, but I think a really important background to all of this. His book, The Space Between Us, really points the figure at residential racial segregation. As we're becoming a multiracial society, we are still a highly segregated society that leads to stereotyping, a politics of resentment, blaming the other, so that our racial animosity, the way in which it's filtered into our politics, is a product of the way our society is structured, its racial order, especially residential segregation. When we have sustained contact with people from other races, the kind of contact that leads us to be in conversation with them, get to know them, understand them a little bit better, it becomes very difficult to demonize or stereotype them. Our way of living does not force us to do that, and therefore our politics is really inflamed when we are transitioning to being a multiracial society. Michael Tomasky, in his book, If We Can Keep It, right? The idea of we have a republic, but can we keep it, points to extreme partisan polarization, especially in a political system with many veto points, with many ways to block legislation. When we're polarized, our politics is paralyzed. This means that we end up not addressing the problems of the moment. 21st century social problems are not well addressed by 20th century social legislation. And so people are discontent, right? And that discontent tends to lead to further polarization. And we're in a self-reinforcing loop that is going to make it very difficult to solve our problems. Pointing to some now contemporary political theorists who say it's an absence of sufficient deliberation. If we really want to fix our politics, we need to give people an opportunity not to just passively watch the news, listen to the radio, even worse, look at their social media feed. We need to give them the opportunity to actively engage in meaningful, empowered discussion of their politics, and then people will see a point in being informed, in being reasonable, in listening to the other side. If politics is just a spectator sport, if it's just like rooting for the Warriors, sorry, or the 49ers, yay, then why do you need to know very much? Just turn out and root on election day. Finally, a bunch of people writing about critical political economy would say it's globalization, it's automation, it's artificial intelligence and other kinds of computational technology that have basically created a world in which people who have wealth are just so much more powerful than the rest of us, and in which it becomes nearly impossible to do what Joe Biden wants to do, a bottom up, middle out economy in which we grow the economy by improving the situation of an average person. that has become exceedingly difficult to do given the nature of the economy in the 21st century. A global information economy is a economy that on the one hand escapes democratic control and on the other hand generates high levels of economic inequality. This is just the nature of the 21st century economy. All right, so I've shared a lot of information with you. I'm afraid I'm still in the primarily diagnostic phase. I want to come out of my slides for a few minutes to hear what comments you have in the remaining few minutes we have. If you want me to, I can go back in, but I think this is a good breaking point for us to begin discussion. Anybody want to start us off, either with a long-term diagnosis, the immediate diagnosis, or those rather scary polls from the last few weeks? Flossie, is that you raising your hand? Remember to unmute yourself, please. There
I
you
did.
go. You did it.
It's the first time you have scared me, really, David. Been listening to the news passionately, dispassionately, thinking we were ahead of the game. And it isn't that I am distressed by what's happening in Israel. I am indeed. I'm distressed by what happens when I leave our own community, to find that our own community of listening to one another, being polite to one another, doesn't exist. I don't set foot outside of this community because I'm in a wheelchair, but the outside community sometimes enters my life, and the kind of care I receive from Kaiser, and it is scaring me. I leave that with you, okay?
Okay, Flossie, and I don't mean to scare you, but I also don't do you any favor if I don't share with you what I think is actually happening in the world right now. And I have to say, on the one hand, I still have a hard time. I can remember it. I'm spending a lot of time caring for my father right now, and I'm thinking a fair bit about him. The election evening 2016, when I was pretty engaged in watching the polls and looking at the states, and I called my father up, and I said something like, I think you better get used to saying President Trump. And he was aghast, but even more, he didn't believe it. He just thought that was crazy. How could that happen? I must be misunderstanding this. Go to sleep. We'll wake up tomorrow and we'll see that it was good news, right? And this sense, how in the world could somebody who has 91 felony indictments, right, be a front runner? Let's just say the polls essentially show a dead heat. He's still a front runner, right? He seems to be running away with the Republican nomination. And my point is not to say, you know, batten down the hatches. We're going to have to put up with another 4 years of Trump. It's way too early, I think, to be saying that. But I do think what is clear, Trump has cornered the market on angry discontent with American politics, and that is a growth market in the 2020s, right? And so that's the mood of the electorate. That's a mood which Trump is better suited to than Biden. Biden is a candidate of hope, of reconciliation, of sympathy. And it turns out that's not the mood we're in right now. And so, yes, treasure those communities where there is civility, where there is mutual care, where there is sympathy and reasonableness and deliberation. And I have to say, I think there are many such communities out there, and they're sources of serious consolation. I am talking in an ongoing way about Israel and Palestine with my students at Sarah Lawrence, and I'm just so gratified and impressed with how careful they're being. That they don't agree, but they're not at each other's throats. They recognize they have to live with each other, they have to work with each other, they therefore have to tolerate, but hopefully respect each other even when they disagree. And so that's the best kind, in a sense, of communal consolation. When you're in a community where you don't agree, but nevertheless you succeed in treating each other with tolerance and respect, that's an important, I think, lesson. It's possible to do this in the 21st century. We've got to figure out how to do it on a larger scale. Iris, did you want to come in as well? Go ahead. You're still muted, Iris. If you hold your space bar down, click that little microphone icon. You had it for half a second and now you're muted again. There you go, I think.
Okay, I
Good.
want to point out that an issue that strikes every family under the age of 50 personally is abortion. And when that has been in the forefront of our political discourse or activity or door knocking or whatever you want to call it, it has won. I think we who live on the more liberal side of the electorate have to send our money for the door knockers in those communities that are perhaps more conservative, and make sure that the message gets out about personal liberty under a Trump and Republican administration. I think that's a winning card that we really need to focus on. Thank you.
Thank you, Iris. And so you started out by saying an issue that affects everyone under 50. And I was thinking to myself, how does this sentence end? And I was thinking, abortion or home ownership? So right, those were the two ways I could fill in that blank. And please note how they point in opposite directions, right? Home ownership has become exceedingly difficult for younger people, given the increase in interest rates and what that's doing to mortgages, given the poor supply of affordable housing, especially where the jobs are in the United States. So if you want to ask about the sources of our economic discontent, it's not just growing inequality, it's the sense that the most reliable asset for being genuinely middle class and economically secure is receding as a possibility for large swaths of our younger people, right? And so that's part of it. I didn't really drill down on the data from young people with regards to economics, but it's very clear that young people are especially convinced that the economy just doesn't work for them anymore. We then pivot to your issue, right? Which I think is exactly right. And so this will be the second post-Dobbs election, right? That we're going to have in 2024. It's clearly a motivating issue. And please note, right, that it's a motivating issue for, in particular, Republican women, right? And so Ohio, which is a quite red state, Virginia, which has been purple but moving in the direction of red in these most recent elections, and frankly every election in which there's been a referendum on abortion or the outcome of the election is likely to affect women's procreative freedoms since the Dobbs decision has gone the way of procreative freedom. And so it's a powerful motivating issue. By the way, I have to hope so is the rhetoric and I don't think we can dismiss it simply as rhetoric about immigration that's coming out of Trump and his campaign. This idea that he's going to build huge detention centers, right? You know, the people remember children separated from their parents on the border in 2018, creating permanent orphans, right? You know, the cruelty of Donald Trump as president, the famous book, The Cruelty is the Point, right? You know, that there is a real sense in which some of the people who have to vote for Trump in order for him to be president are repelled by what it means for their procreative freedom, for what it means the nation becomes. I'm not saying that the polls today predict that Trump will win a year from now. It's way too early. He's not even yet officially the nominee, right? So having said all that, the fact remains that this is what the polls say in November of 2023. And irrespective of what happens in November 2024, I think we should be deeply concerned, even if it's just people saying, I'm so pissed off at the American economy and government that I'm willing to at least tell a pollster that I'm going to vote for Donald Trump again. 91 indictments, the overturning of Roe, the proto-fascist rhetoric notwithstanding, right? That's a sign that something is deeply amiss. Yeah, thank you, Iris. It's good to circle back, and there are a variety of issues we haven't talked about, including if he's actually not just indicted but convicted. What does that do to his electoral prospects? I suspect that's going to peel off more voters away from him. So it's Barbara's iPhone. It's not Barbara. Go ahead. You're muted.
Yeah, I got it.
Thanks.
So I understand the disillusion with the American economy and the disillusion with our failed government, but why does that necessarily push us toward some kind of autocratic or perhaps oligarchical control, a la Trump? Why can't it move us in the direction of European social democracies, which would be even beyond where Biden seems to want to take us? Why is it written that the only way that we can move to get out of this bind that we find ourselves in is in the direction of Trump?
And so the framework. David, can you mute? I'll mute you because we're getting an echo. Okay. The framework I set up started to give a couple answers to this, right? And I don't want to suggest that they're decisive answers. One is the degree of tension between the democratic aspiration and the reality of your society so great that it causes you to lose faith in democracy, right? So there's a constructive amount of tension and there's a destructive amount of tension. And one way to put this, to put it in greater historical context in the United States is, look, we voted for Obama. We voted for him twice. We voted for Biden. We keep trying to work with this system, and it just keeps getting worse. So Trump is the person who says it doesn't work. Don't be silly. Don't reinvest hope when you have been so disappointed so many times already, right? So that's, I think, one aspect of this that's coming out of the framework. The second aspect, right, has to do with the way the middle goes, right? And so we have a group of people in our society, a substantial group of people, right? The UAW just got a new contract. UPS just got a new contract. Didn't just, but recently got a new contract. That's a much better contract. Maybe the working class in the United States is starting to get a little bit of a better deal. We can only hope that the unionization at Amazon starts to take hold, or unionization at Starbucks or Walmart, some of our big structural employers who treat their employees so abysmally. But having said that, does the middle double down and say we want more democracy and we want it to work better? Or do they instead go the way the elite typically wants them to go, which is the politics of scapegoating and resentment? And why and when they go which way, I think, is a really complicated story. It in part depends on the charisma and the nature of the political leaders. And I think we can, in a dispassionate, disinterested way, notice that Donald Trump is a more charismatic politician than Joe Biden, right? And so it's not just that Donald Trump's capacity to channel the mood of many people in the country is better than Biden's. It's also that his charisma is such that he attracts a loyal following. But having said that, that's an idiosyncratic factor, and that might be eroded if there's a major civil verdict against him that says he's a fraudster. It may be further eroded if there's a major criminal verdict against him that says he tried to steal the last election, right? And so all of that to say, I don't think that we should give up on things getting better. But having said that, if, right, the critical political economists are right, the problem is in the structure of a global economy. Please note that the European welfare, social welfare states, social democracy are being eroded, are being scaled back, right? And they're experiencing this kind of politics too. It might be that things that are really difficult to control at the nation state level are creating a sense that 18th century democracy doesn't work in the 21st century. If that's all we've got, then we maybe need to look elsewhere. So that's the, again, really difficult, I think, possibility we have to entertain as we look ahead to the elections of 2024 and backwards to the history of why democracy doesn't seem to be working in the third decade of the 21st century. All right, everyone. Difficult, interesting, important topics. I will start next week on the question of how we might repair our Constitution, looking at some concrete proposals. I will also say happy Thanksgiving. I hope you enjoy, whether you're there or with family, the meal, the holiday, the company, the consolation. Take care, happy holiday, and I'll see everybody next Saturday. Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you, David.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.